Hello insiders, how have you all been? It's finally time for us to all gather round for a quiet night in and take a look at episode 2 of Inside Number 9. And I feel like this is going to be a really interesting one to talk about, not just because of the episode itself, but also for the direction it took the series in so early on and what its legacy is within Number 9. I also have a funny story about doing a script reading for this episode, linked below, that ended up getting demonetised. So, get your phones on silent, I know they can be a bit fiddly, ensure that any valuable works of art in your home haven't been replaced with kitchen roll, and let's talk about A Quiet Night In. Episode 2 takes place in another expensive, but this time very modern house, which is the home of Gerald and his glamorous younger wife Sabrina. Their names aren't actually spoken out loud within the episode, you'll find them in the credits or the Number 9 script books, because there's virtually no dialogue at all. A Quiet Night In is, effectively, a half-hour silent movie, making it the genesis of the Number 9 experimental or gimmick episode, which the show has since become known for. And they came up with some very creative ways of making this work. Gerald and Sabrina have fallen out, hence they're not speaking to each other. Their housekeeper Kim is busy with her duties, and while this is happening, two burglars named Eddie and Ray are attempting to sneak into the house and steal a valuable painting. Only they're not the most competent of art robbers, and a lot of the comedy comes from them attempting to communicate and work in tandem without talking or being seen, while also trying, and usually failing, not to make a colossal amount of noise. So right away we see that this is a very different beast from Sardines, and well, that's the beauty of this being an anthology series. Within the show's small budget and half-hour time slot, the writers have complete freedom to create whatever they like, and A Quiet Night In makes that very clear. And yet you can still tell that the writing and humour is definitely their style. While it still gets pretty dark at times, more details on that later, the humour in episode 2 is much sillier, more like slapstick or farce. There's pretty much a constant flow of visual gags as the burglars try and make their way through the house while trying to avoid triggering outdoor lights, forgetting to put their phones on silent, and, at one point, miming the timescale involved in taking a dump, after which one of them gives the other one a silent round of applause. The episode and its laughs are not only extremely well paced, but also seem to sync effortlessly with the soundtrack, a lot of which consists of pre-recorded diegetic music. I'm not sure how much of this was planned with the shooting script, picked up in the edit, or maybe just coincidence, but either way it just feels right on point. The music itself is varied as the characters put on everything from Rachmaninoff to power ballads to the theme from EastEnders. For any non-Brits out there, that's a highly popular UK soap opera that would be instantly recognisable to its native audience, even if you don't watch it. The soundtrack works both to heighten and break tension at different points in the story, and while there are a few violent moments later on, between the elements of surprise, relationship melodrama, and the general haplessness of the robbers, none of it ends up feeling too heavy. The fact that we instantly get to know the characters' personalities, conflicts, and goals without hearing a single word between them says a lot about the actors' performances, as well as the direction by David Kerr, who had also directed the first episode, and also the strength of the script. Because yes, A Quiet Night In has a very long and detailed script, even more so for not having dialogue. As I mentioned earlier, I recorded my own reading of the script as published in the Number 9 script books, and that video runs longer than the episode itself. The cast here do a fantastic job in expressing the entire story through their physical and facial expressions. Steve and Reese are a great double act, as always, with Steve bumbling around and Reese frequently looking exasperated. According to Steve in a 2014 interview with Beyond the Joke, the two of them had always wanted to play a pair of robbers in the kids' TV show Brum, which is just adorable, and I think they would have been great. For those who've never seen it, Brum was a live-action children's programme about a little car that went on adventures with no dialogue and a lot of physical comedy from the human actors. I'll link some below just in case you want to picture these two characters in a far more wholesome show. A Quiet Night In also features another great double act in Dennis Lawson and Una Chaplin, playing a couple who are clearly rowing but are at the stage where they're not speaking to each other. And while apparently this was more of an accidental nod in their casting choice, It's interesting to note that Una is the granddaughter of the legendary silent film star Charlie Chaplin, or the Little Tramp. No, wait, that was Stella from The League of Gentlemen. Anyway, Una turns out to be a tremendously talented silent actor in her own right, with every gesture honed to perfection, and she just makes it look so effortless. She was great in Game of Thrones as well, but now that number 9 has wrapped, she can finally be proud to be part of a show that actually stuck the landing. Also, Dennis Lawson is from Glasgow, which has no relevance to anything except that I obviously think that's cool. Also, props to Joyce Vahiri as Kim the housekeeper, who's just got this great formidable presence throughout the episode that I don't think gets enough credit. A Quiet Night In is a great episode in its own right, and one I frequently hear being mentioned as a lot of people's personal favourites, or as a watch anytime type of episode. But really it's even more than that, and I think we can put a lot of this down to the episode's placement within the series run. Because doing such an experimental episode so early on really seemed to make a statement. This told us that whenever we step into number 9, for the next half hour, anything can happen. I think this was an unbelievably bold move by Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith to do this so soon, especially when they had a few more dark comedy dramas with a twist already in the can. Remember, Tom and Jerry and Last Gasp were coming up next, and Nana's Party from Series 2 had already been written. But instead, they let loose with a virtually silent episode released with zero fanfare from themselves or the Beeb. And while this risked alienating a huge chunk of their audience, they clearly believed in what they were doing and they just went for it. For two writers known for their witty dialogue, this seems completely out of left field, especially after the last episode. But as they've often commented in interviews, this presented Steve and Reece with new challenges in storytelling. Plus, it also challenged the audience to watch TV in a way that perhaps they weren't used to. A Quiet Night In reminded me of two things. First of all, Hush from Series 4 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which also got a lot of praise for its creativity and, for the most part, the characters are unable to speak. It's also a terrifying Monster of the Week episode that could be watched in isolation, but I take no responsibility if the gentlemen start haunting your nightmares. Bear in mind though, Hush was a risk the show took while it was already immensely popular and already had 3 seasons in the tank, so any fan backlash or a ratings dip at that point probably wouldn't have done too much damage. What I'm saying is, I can't imagine Buffy pulling something like this in only the 2nd episode. The other thing A Quiet Night In reminded me of was the experience of seeing the artist in a cinema full of people who had no idea what they were getting into. For those who don't remember, this was the 2011 black and white silent film that won the Academy Award for Best Picture. So basically, I went to see it the day after the awards in a full house of people who knew nothing about the film apart from the fact that it had won the Oscar. Hardly anyone in there seemed to know that they were about to watch a silent film. A few minutes after it started, I could hear a few folks muttering, "Is the whole film going to be like this?" And they didn't sound too happy about it. In fact, I was fully expecting people to start walking out of the screening, taking their popcorn with them and asking for their money back. But instead, something amazing happened. Everyone stayed until the end, eyes glued to the screen and with the whole theatre laughing and reacting together along with the story. One by one, I could see the little blue lights from people's phones going out as everyone in the room actually took the time to switch off from the outside world and immerse themselves in the film. There was even a great moment towards the end where the full audience collectively gasped in shock, then burst out laughing in relief, which is something I can't say I've experienced at a film since. A Quiet Night In does pretty much the same thing. It convinces everyone to just put away the phones and other distractions for once and actually pay attention to what's happening on the screen. And I feel like that's such a rare experience these days and definitely a rewarding one. It also showed the audience that number 9 was deserving of your full attention and that the best way to watch it in future would be for one glorious uninterrupted half hour, not just as background viewing or something to stop and start. It really helped too that this went out on the BBC and so the experience was never broken by an unwelcome ad break, because the BBC channels don't do commercials. And this was great because the more attention you paid to number 9, the more you'd be rewarded by spotting all those tiny visual details that alluded to twists, gave us insights into the characters, or just gave us a cool Easter egg to spot. Because how else are you supposed to find the hair statue in every episode? I've probably laboured the point by now, but A Quiet Night In really set a precedent for the show going forward. Give this show your full attention and the experience will be all the better for it. And also, expect the unexpected. After all, this was the first gimmick episode of number 9, but it was by no means the last. Now, I'm going to start discussing a few spoilery bits for the episode, but if you're new to number 9, here's a word of advice. Make sure you watch this episode before watching the Halloween special Deadline. I won't say why, but just trust me on this. And another thing, if you're only a fan of the comedy episodes of number 9 and you don't handle horror very well, maybe you'll want to give Deadline a miss altogether because it might affect the way you see this episode in the future. Trust me, it is really hard to talk about this without giving anything away, but I hope I did an okay job. Anyway, I mentioned earlier that I did a script reading of this episode on YouTube just after the number 9 script books came out, and it's one of the very few videos I've ever done that got slapped with an 18+ rating and was demonetised. And considering the dark and taboo subject matter I've discussed at length on this channel over the years with 0 issues, including content from the most disturbing episodes of Inside Number 9, this seemed weird to me. And after looking deeper into it and discussing it in the comments section with others of an appropriate age group, I think we might have the answer, and it seems to highlight a weird difference in cultural standards between the UK and the rest of the world. So, here's my theory. A few people did speculate on the content of the episode and which parts of it might have been too spicy for YouTube. Someone asked if it was because the little dog gets killed, but here's the thing. In the original script, the dog survives and is seen getting out of the umbrella stand unharmed. Another person wondered if it was because the episode featured a trans character, and I certainly hope that wouldn't be grounds for demonetising, and I really don't think that was the case here. The far more likely candidate, and I'm being very careful not to get myself sent to YouTube jail by talking about them, is the inflatable friend that Reese encounters under the bed. To make life easier for myself, I started a chat over on Patreon about the subject and asked if anyone had any suggestions for a name I could use to refer to this character. And I got some absolute belters, including I Wanna Jack Off and Tess Tickles. Big thanks to Julia for both of those, but I'm going to go with a name that I came up with myself, which is Dolly Parts On. Now, in the culture and media landscape I grew up in, Dolly and her ilk would be seen as a bit risque, but not quite the symbol of depravity as other dollies are viewed in other cultures. Because British dollies have always looked a bit silly, and they'd definitely be recognised by people well under the age of 18, whether or not they knew exactly what they were made for. We just knew it was something rude, so that was automatically hilarious. You'd see them in different styles, genders and species. There was a sheep version that became very popular at stag do's, and I'm pretty sure that more than one of those made its way into a children's nativity play. Backside covered up, I should hope. As a child, I personally remember seeing Dolly's ancestors on postcards and stalls during seaside holidays to Blackpool, where you could also find novelty sweets and souvenirs in the shapes of Dolly's features, basically anywhere you looked. Yes, British humour is a weird and silly thing at times. As for Dolly's media appearances, I'm pretty sure that Mike owned one in the young ones. Plus, I remember laughing my ass off at an episode of Only Fools and Horses where the entire plot centred around a faulty batch of Dolly's pals that kept popping up around the flat. That episode was released on VHS at a rating of PG, by the way, so once again, this gives you an idea of how cheeky but harmless Dolly and her friends are perceived here. This is why I was slightly taken aback by YouTube's decision and why I had no reservations about discussing Dolly in all her glory and with all her parts on. Officially, the script video was flagged for discussing sexual behaviour, language or expressions, and I can only guess that dear old Dolly was at the centre of this. And sure, it was a bit of a pain, but I think it's led to a funny story for this channel, and once again, left me with a weird search history that I should probably delete. The things I do for you lot, honestly. Anyway, while A Quiet Night In is still a very popular episode of number 9 and up there with many people's all-time favourites, there are still a few valid criticisms and I think it's only fair to acknowledge them. First of all, there's the argument that if it wasn't for the gimmick, this wouldn't be a great story. And yeah, I actually agree with that. And I've seen plenty of other films and number 9s where if you took out the gimmick, you'd still have a great story worth telling. Without the silent episode concept, this is really just a knockabout comedy about an art heist gone wrong. And true, we'd still have the jokes or commentary in there about modern art being highly valued but indistinguishable from literal junk, which is hardly a hot take by now, but it's executed here in a pretty funny way, I think. But then I'd also argue that the silent gimmick is so thoroughly baked into the episode that it kind of becomes the whole point. Plus it lends itself so well to the theme of communication and how badly things can go wrong when people can't or won't express their feelings or listen to others. Plus I'm a big fan of dark comedy, physical comedy and slapstick, and I don't think these things always have to involve a greater story or meaning, so this wasn't really an issue for me. But your taste may vary and that's fine. Some people might not enjoy the darker or more violent slapstick moments of this episode, and once again that's a matter of individual taste. And of course I'm talking about the bit with the dog. But I can tell you, I absolutely scream-laughed the first time I saw it. For the record, I'm a huge dog lover, and one of the few things I've never become desensitised to is cruelty to animals. But much like that Matt Berry skit where he kicks the dog in the air after the owner tells him she has a boyfriend, and then he runs up the street and kicks another dog for good measure, I think you can pull off this kind of slapstick as long as the dog looks suitably fake. Nobody was laughing at John Wick, but most people did when Baxter got punted off a bridge during Anchorman. See also Mummy from Peep Show, even if that ending is absolutely grim. It's the surprise, silliness and very fake-looking dogs that make it for me. However, if you didn't find this scene funny, I completely understand why, and as I mentioned, the dog lives in the scripted version. So yeah, hope that helps. And I'll link that Matt Berry clip below for anyone who's interested, and because it's hilarious. The other criticism I've heard is the episode's handling of Sabrina, and yeah, I get that. Admittedly, this is a fairly old episode now, and I've definitely seen far worse representations of trans and other non-conforming characters, but it's something I like to keep in mind when recommending episodes to new viewers. For the record, I don't believe there was any malice on the part of the creators, plus the reveal scene I think is meant to play more off Reese's reaction than anything else. That was the part I was laughing at anyway. But still, there's legit criticism to be had here, and the channel Council of Geeks has already explained it way better than I ever could. I'm not going to dwell too much here, but I will say that it's a perfectly healthy thing to accept that there may be flaws in the things that you love, even if you don't see them or they don't personally affect you. Don't just jump to a show's defence before you've even thought about it from another perspective. Empathy is important, people. I probably didn't have to remind you of that because this is by far one of the most intelligent and thoughtful communities I've ever been a part of, but still, I'm sure we'd all like to keep it that way. And finally, for those who've seen Deadline, this opening hits a little differently now, doesn't it? I'm not even sure that I'd trust it not to go off the rails if I saw this one on a live broadcast. But that's part of the fun of doing this as a retrospective and seeing the impact that A Quiet Night In has had on number 9 as a whole. And now whenever I see the little dog hit the window, I remember the big laugh it got during the montage reel in Plodding On, which kinda ties the whole series together from start to finish, doesn't it? Plus, we've had an amazing legacy of number 9 gimmick episodes since this one became a hit. I'm looking forward to revisiting Cold Comfort when I get to series 2. So we probably have A Quiet Night In to thank for those later ones as well. Again, I really have to applaud how bold they were in putting this in as episode 2 and in what that meant for the future of the show. I think it's safe to say it now, but they really pulled it off. So, what did everyone else think of A Quiet Night In? What's your favourite Inside Number 9 gimmick episode? And are there any other weird aspects of British humour that you've stumbled on completely by accident? I'd love to read your thoughts, so go ahead and share them down below. Thanks to all my wonderful patrons who get to see these videos early, and I'll be back again soon with my review of episode 3, Tom and Jerry. But if you really can't wait to hear me talk about the next episode, I did do a deep dive into this one back during the days of lockdown, when the story and Tom's descent into isolation and squalor started to hit just a little too hard. Thanks again for listening, like and subscribe if you want to help out the channel, and ring the bell if you want to see the next video as soon as it's out. Hope you have a great night in, or out, quiet or otherwise.